Emily Whitmore was 12 years old, and she was trying to make half a biscuit last 2 days. She broke it with both hands, careful, like it was something holy, and held the bigger piece out to her little sister without a word. May shook her head and pushed it back. Emily pushed it forward again. Neither of them cried. That's what broke him. If this story already has your heart, hit subscribe, drop your city in the comments, and let's see how far this one travels. The biscuit wasn't even a full biscuit anymore. It had been dropped once stepped on near the edge, and the piece that survived was small enough to fit inside a child's palm, with room to spare. Emily Whitmore held what was left of it with both hands, standing in the middle of the main road in Red Hollow, Texas on the hottest afternoon that summer had managed to produce. She wasn't crying. Caleb Mercer noticed that first. He'd ridden into more towns than he could name, and he'd seen hungry children before, the crying kind, the screaming kind, the kind that grabbed at strangers' sleeves. Emily wasn't any of those. She stood in the middle of the baking red dirt road, like she had decided somewhere deep inside herself that crying was a luxury her family couldn't afford. Her little sister May sat in a wooden wheelchair 10 feet away. The chair had one bad wheel. Someone had tied a strip of old leather around the axle to keep it from listing, but the leather had gone dry in the heat, and the whole thing tilted anyway. May was 8 years old and small for it. She sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched her sister hold the piece of biscuit like she was watching something that required her full, careful attention. Emily walked to her and held it out. May looked at it. Then she looked at her sister's face. Then she pushed the biscuit back toward Emily's chest with both palms, firm and quiet, like she'd made up her mind before Emily had even moved. "You take it," Emily said. "I'm not hungry." May: "I already ate. You had water and half a cracker this morning and I was there, so don't." May folded her hands back in her lap. "You give it to Mama." Emily's jaw moved. She didn't speak for a moment. "Mama can't eat solid right now," Doc Cole said. "Then you eat it." "I'll eat later." "Emily." "I said I'll eat later." Neither of them moved. The sun was punishing. The dust didn't stir. Down the length of Red Hollow's Main Street, 2 men sat outside the feed store and watched without expression, and a woman hanging laundry on the far side of the road glanced over once and then looked deliberately away. The way people look away from something that makes them feel something they'd rather not feel. Caleb sat on his horse and watched. He hadn't meant to stop. He'd been riding through the way he rode through everywhere with no particular plan to stay. Red Hollow was a junction town, the kind of place you pass through heading somewhere else, and he'd planned to water his horse, buy 2 days of supplies, and be gone before dark. He had no ties here, no history, no reason to care about the geography of one small girl's suffering on a Tuesday afternoon in July. He stopped anyway. I didn't get down from the horse. Not yet. He just sat there with one hand resting on the saddle horn and watched Emily Whitmore try to feed her sick sister a piece of biscuit that neither of them was willing to take. Finally, Emily broke the piece again, smaller now, almost nothing, and pressed half of that into May's hand with enough force that May couldn't push it back without dropping it. May looked down at the fragment in her palm. Then she looked up at her sister. "Half," Emily said. "That's the rule." May's fingers closed around it. They ate at the same time, both of them chewing slow like they were trying to make it last. Neither of them looked at each other while they did it. Caleb Mercer got down from his horse. He tied the horse at the post outside the general store and went inside to buy his supplies. He didn't speak to the children. He didn't know what he would have said. There was a kind of dignity in what he'd seen that he didn't want to interrupt with the wrong words. And Caleb had learned a long time ago that the wrong words from a stranger did more damage than silence. The man behind the counter inside was named Bill Pierce. Caleb knew the type before the man opened his mouth, thick through the middle small eyes that moved fast, the kind of careful disinterest that meant he was watching everything. "Just passing through," Pierce said, not looking up from the counter. "That's the plan. Good plan." Pierce set the flour and dried beans on the counter without being asked what Caleb needed. He'd clearly misjudged the order. Caleb didn't correct him. "Not much to keep a man here." "Those kids outside," Caleb said. "The little one in the chair." Pierce's hands slowed on the counter, just slightly. "The Whitmore girls," he said. "They got family. Their mother, she's sick." Pierce paused. "She's been sick since spring." Their father, something moved across Pierce's face. "Construction accident, last year. Tom Reddick's crew out on the Mallory property." Caleb looked at him. "That's a shame," Caleb said. "It is what it is." Pierce pushed the goods across the counter. "You want this or not?" Caleb paid for what he actually needed, which was different from what Pierce had pulled, and didn't press the conversation further. But he stood at the door for a moment before he went out, looking back down the street at where May still sat in her tilted wheelchair, and Emily stood with her arms crossed, watching the road with the expression of someone who had learned to calculate threats by habit. He went to his horse. He untied the saddlebag on the left side. He took out a cloth-wrapped package that held the last of the cornbread he'd made 2 mornings ago and 3 strips of dried beef he'd been saving, and he walked over to Emily Whitmore and held it out without ceremony. Emily looked at the food. Then she looked at him. "We don't take charity," she said. Her voice was flat, not rude, just stating a position that had been established through repeated necessity. "It's not charity," Caleb said. "I bought too much. I can't carry it all on horseback. It'll go bad." Emily held his gaze for a long moment. She was 12 years old, and she had eyes like someone much older, the kind of eyes that had been measuring the intentions of adults for long enough to get good at it. "That's not true," she said. "No," he agreed. "It's not." She stared at him. He stood there and let her. Finally, she reached out and took the package. "Thank you," she said. The words were careful, formal, like she'd been taught them by someone who understood their weight. "How's your mother doing?" he asked. The careful look came back. "Who are you?" "Nobody," he said. "Just passing through." "Then why do you want to know about our mother?" It was a fair question. He didn't have a good answer for it that wasn't the truth, so he told her the truth. "Because I watched you split that biscuit," he said. "And I figured if things are bad enough that you're doing that, they're probably bad in ways people around here aren't helping with." Emily's chin came up a fraction. "People around here don't help with much." "I noticed." She studied him for another long beat. Then she looked back at her sister. May was already eating small, careful bites, chewing slowly the same way Emily had. Something in Emily's expression shifted for just a moment. Something private and exhausted and relieved, before her face went controlled again. "She's at the old repair shop," Emily said, not looking at him. "On the south end. She can't get up anymore. She hasn't been able to get up since last Tuesday." Caleb nodded. "Is there a doctor in this town?" "Dr. Cole, but he stopped coming." A beat. "He says we owe him from before." "How much?" "More than we have." She said it without shame, just fact. "More than we're going to have." Caleb looked down the road toward the south end of town. He could see the edge of the building. She meant a low, wide structure with a sun-bleached sign and a door that didn't sit quite right in its frame. "I'll see what I can do about the doctor," he said. Emily turned to look at him then. Full on. The measuring look again, harder now. "Why?" she said. It was the same question she'd asked before, dressed differently. He understood she was asking something real, not just why he was helping, but why she should believe he would follow through. Why he wasn't going to be like every other person in Red Hollow who had made a gesture and then disappeared. "I don't have a good reason," he said. "I just can't get back on that horse yet." Takai. Dr. Edwin Cole lived above his office on the north side of Main Street. He was a man of about 55, well-fed by the standards of the town, with the kind of careful, deliberate manner that came from years of professional distance. He opened the door at Caleb's knock and looked at him with the flat assessment of a man who had learned to identify trouble by how it presented itself. "I'm not buying anything," Cole said. "Not selling," Caleb said. "Sarah Whitmore, South End, you stopped going." Cole's expression didn't change. "That's a private matter between myself and my patient." "Your patient is unable to get out of bed, and her children are splitting biscuit pieces in the road." A pause. Cole's jaw shifted. "The account is significantly in arrears." "How much?" Cole named a figure. It wasn't enormous. It was the kind of amount that would have meant nothing to the man who owned the land on the north side of the valley, the man whose name Caleb had already heard twice without asking Victor Mallory, and it meant everything to a widow with 2 children, and no income, and a body that was losing its argument with the summer. Caleb counted out the money from the folded bills in his vest pocket. He held it out. Cole looked at the money, then at Caleb. "Who are you?" "Nobody," Caleb said. "Just someone passing through who made a miscalculation." Cole took the money slowly. "I'll go this afternoon." "You'll go now," Caleb said. It wasn't a request. Cole read his face and reached for his bag. The repair shop had been empty for 3 years. Somebody had nailed boards over the 2 front windows, but the boards had dried and split in the summer heat, and the light came through in long, dusty slabs. Sarah Whitmore lay on a cot pushed against the far wall beneath a window that was too high to look out of. She was 34 years old, and she looked older than that, in the way that very sick people do not aged exactly, but stripped of something like the illness had been taking things that weren't weight, that weren't visible, but that were there when you looked for them. She was awake when Caleb came in with Cole. Her eyes found them immediately sharp, aware none of the fog he'd expected. "Mrs. Whitmore," Cole said, setting his bag down. There was something slightly stiff in his voice, the professional manner of a man who knew he was in the wrong and hadn't quite decided how to inhabit that knowledge. "I'm going to take a listen." "Dr. Cole." Sarah's voice was thin but steady. "You didn't have to come." "Yes, ma'am," Cole said quietly. "I did." She looked past him at Caleb. He'd stepped back near the door far enough to be out of the way close enough that she could see him clearly. "Who is this?" she asked. "He paid your account," Cole said, not looking up from his bag. Sarah looked at Caleb for a long moment. "You don't know us," she said. "No, ma'am." "Then why would you do that?" "Your daughters were outside," he said simply. "I saw them." Something moved behind her eyes. Not pity for herself, nothing like that. More like recognition. Like she understood exactly what he meant and didn't need it explained further, and the understanding of it was something she had to absorb in small pieces. She looked back at the ceiling. "Emily's proud," she said. "I noticed. She gets it from her father." A pause, longer than a breath. He was proud too, stubborn about it, about not asking for help. She stopped. When she spoke again, her voice was careful, like she was lifting something fragile. "He died last September, on the Mallory property." "I heard," Caleb said. "Construction accident." "That's what they called it," Sarah said. Caleb went still. Cole had his stethoscope out and was listening to her chest, and he didn't look up, but something in the set of his shoulders changed the way a man's shoulders change when he hears something he's already heard before and doesn't want to hear again. "That's what they called it," Caleb repeated. Sarah didn't say anything else. She was looking at the ceiling, and her hands were folded over her chest, and she had the expression of a woman who had said the exact amount that she had decided to say on this particular subject on this particular day. Caleb filed it away. Noah Whitmore came in through the back 20 minutes later, while Cole was still examining his mother. He was 14 and big for it, already carrying the particular posture of a boy who had been trying to be the man of a situation that was too large for him. Chin up, shoulders back, eyes that moved to threats before they moved to anything else. He stopped when he saw Caleb. His whole body went watchful. "Who are you?" he said. "Friend of your sister's," Caleb said. Noah looked at Cole, then back at Caleb. "You're the one who paid Cole." "Guilty." "Why?" Caleb looked at the boy, 14 years old with tired eyes and a jaw set hard. "You want the real reason, or the one that doesn't require any more trust than you've already got to give?" Noah stared at him for a long beat. "Real one. Because I came into this town and I saw your sisters on the road, and I couldn't leave," Caleb said. "That's the whole of it. I don't have an angle. I'm not working for anyone. I just couldn't leave." Noah's jaw worked. "Lots of people say things." "I know. Nobody stays." "I know that too. So why should I believe you're different?" Caleb looked at him steadily. "You probably shouldn't yet," he said. Believing something before it's been proved is a good way to get hurt. But I'm still here, and I'd like to stay until your mother's better if you'll let me. I won't ask for anything in return, and I won't tell you what to do. I'll just be here." The boy held his gaze for a long time. Long enough that Caleb could feel the weight of what the boy was measuring. All the months of no one. All the silence of a town that had watched and looked away. All the grief of a family that had been managing the unmanageable on its own since September. "You can sleep in the storeroom," Noah said finally. "Back of the building, there's a cot." "Thank you," Caleb said. Noah nodded once and turned toward his mother's cot. He didn't say anything else. But when he sat down next to her and took her hand, he sat with his back a little less rigid than before. Cole took Caleb aside before he left. "She's worse than I'd like," Cole said, his voice low, his eyes on the door. "The lung infection has moved further than it had in the spring. She needs rest, real rest, and proper food and continued treatment. She can recover. I want to be clear that she can recover. But she cannot be moved. Not right now. Not without serious risk." "Define serious risk," Caleb said. Cole met his eyes. "I mean she could die." Caleb nodded once. "Who knows that?" he asked. "About how bad she is." Cole paused. "People talk in a town this size." "Meaning Mallory knows." Cole's mouth pressed flat. He didn't answer. He picked up his bag and went to the door and paused with his hand on the frame. "Mallory's been asking about the land deed," Cole said without turning around. "I know because he asked me if Sarah had mentioned it. He asked me the way a man asks when he already knows the answer, but wants to know how much other people know." He stopped. "I told him I didn't know anything about deeds. I'm a doctor, not a lawyer." "Was that true?" Caleb asked. A long pause. Cole's hand tightened slightly on the doorframe. "Come back in the morning," Cole said. "There are things I should have said out loud a long time ago. Maybe it's time to say them." He went out without waiting for an answer. Caleb stood in the dim light of the repair shop and listened to the sounds of the family behind him. May's quiet breathing. Noah murmuring something to his mother, the distant dry creak of the bad wheel on the wooden chair as Emily rolled her sister closer to the cot. Outside down, the length of the road. Red Hollow went on doing what it did. Not evil exactly, not cruel exactly, but indifferent in the practiced, deliberate way that becomes its own kind of cruelty after long enough. And in the storeroom at the back of the building, on a cot that hadn't been used in 3 years, Caleb Mercer lay down fully dressed with his boots on and stared at the ceiling and thought about a man who had died on a construction site, and a town that had looked away, and a deed that someone wanted badly enough to ask a doctor about. He thought about Emily on the road with half a biscuit. I thought about the way she'd said, "We don't take charity," not angry, not bitter, just a statement of the rules she'd built to survive. He was still thinking when the heat finally broke past midnight, and the first breath of cool air came through the gap under the storeroom door, and something outside, some animal, or the wind moved through the dry grass with a sound like a long, slow exhale. He didn't leave. The morning came in hot and unforgiving. The kind of July heat that settled into the walls of a building overnight and had nowhere to go by dawn. Caleb was already awake when he heard Emily moving in the main room. He'd been awake for a while, lying on the cot in the storeroom, with his eyes open and his mind working through what Cole had said at the door. "There are things I should have said out loud a long time ago." A doctor didn't say something like that about nothing. A doctor said something like that when he'd been carrying a weight long enough that it had started to show. He got up, pulled on his boots, and pushed open the storeroom door. Emily was at the small table near the front wall, tearing a piece of dried beef into strips small enough for her mother to manage. Her hands moved fast and practiced, and she didn't look up when he came in, which meant she'd heard him and decided he didn't require acknowledgement. "How'd she sleep?" Caleb asked. "Some." Emily kept tearing. "She had a bad hour around 3. Noah sat with her." "Where's Noah now?" "Out back. He does odd jobs for Mr. Hanley at the livery some mornings. 50 cents if Hanley's in a good mood." She paused. "Hanley's not usually in a good mood." Caleb looked toward the cot. Sarah was asleep, her breathing audible from across the room, Not the labored drowning sound he'd feared, but still heavier than it should have been. May was curled in the chair beside her, also asleep, her head tilted sideways against the wooden back. "You sleep at all?" he asked Emily. "I'm fine. That's not what I asked." Emily finally looked up. That measuring look again, steady and older than 12 had any business being. "I slept enough," she said. "We don't have the luxury of sleeping too much." He didn't push it. He sat down across from her at the table, and after a moment he said, "I'm going to see Dr. Cole this morning. He said there were things he needed to tell me." Emily's hand slowed on the beef, just slightly. "About what?" "I don't know yet. About your father, maybe." The hands stopped entirely. She set down the strip of beef and looked at him. "What about my father?" It wasn't a question. The way she said it, it wasn't a question at all. It was the voice of someone who had asked themselves that question every single day for 10 months and hadn't had an answer that satisfied them. "I don't know," Caleb said honestly. "But I think Cole does. And I think he's been sitting on it." Emily looked at him for a long time. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were doing that rapid internal calculation he'd already come to recognize, measuring trust, measuring risk, measuring what it would cost her to believe something and have it come apart. "My father didn't fall," she said, quietly, flat, like she'd said it before to people who hadn't listened. "He was careful. He was always careful. He checked everything twice. That's what Mama always said, that he checked everything twice." "I believe you," Caleb said. That landed differently than she expected. He could see it, the slight adjustment in her posture, the almost imperceptible loosening around her eyes. Like she'd been braced for the dismissal and hadn't gotten it. "Nobody else does," she said. "I know." She picked the beef strip back up and started tearing again. Her hands weren't quite as steady as before. "Victor Mallory came to see Mama 2 weeks after Papa died," she said. "He brought flowers. He sat with her and held her hand and told her how sorry he was. He cried." She paused. "He cried real good, I'll give him that." "What did he want?" "He said Papa owed him money, from a loan he'd taken out to buy equipment for the shop." She said it without expression, the voice of someone reciting facts they've memorized through repetition. "He said the debt transferred to Mama. He said there were papers." She stopped. Mama had never heard about any loan. Papa never mentioned it. But Mallory had papers. He had papers with Papa's signature on them. Caleb looked at her. "You think the signature was forged?" "I know the signature was forged," Emily said. "Papa crossed his H a certain way. His whole life he crossed his H the same way Mama showed me letters from before they were married, and it was always the same. The signature on Mallory's paper crossed it different." She looked up. "I told that to Sheriff Briggs. I showed him 2 of Papa's old letters to prove it." "What did Briggs say?" Emily's mouth pressed into a thin, hard line. "He said children weren't qualified to read documents." The silence that followed had weight to it. Caleb sat in it for a moment and let it settle. "I'm going to see Cole," he said again. "And then I'm going to come back and tell you what he says. All of it. I won't keep any of it from you." She looked at him. "People keep things from children to protect them." "I know. I'm not going to do that." Another long measurement. Then she nodded once, small, precise, a decision made and committed to. "Okay," she said, and went back to tearing the beef. "Joe." Cole opened the door before Caleb knocked. He'd clearly been watching from the window, which told Caleb everything about the state of the man's nerves. "Come in," Cole said, quickly. He led Caleb into the back room, the examination room, cleared of patients, and closed the door. He didn't offer coffee. He didn't make small talk. He went straight to the cabinet along the wall, unlocked it with a key from his vest pocket, and took out a folded envelope. He held it for a moment without speaking. A man building himself up to something. "James Whitmore came into me in August," Cole said. "Last year. Before the accident. Before." He stressed that word. He was worried. He'd found something on the Mallory property paperwork, land surveys records, that didn't match what was on file at the county seat. He thought Mallory was repositioning boundary lines, gradually, on paper in ways that were hard to catch unless you were looking. "Land fraud," Caleb said. Land fraud on a significant scale. Cole's fingers tightened on the envelope. The Whitmore property sits between two parcels that Mallory needs. If he has both sides, he controls the water access for the whole South Valley. James figured that out. He was trying to get evidence together before he went to anyone official because he knew if he went without proof, Mallory would deny it and he'd look like a fool. And then he died. 6 weeks after he came to me. Cole looked at the envelope. He left this with me for safekeeping. Said if anything happened to him, I should know what it meant. He held the envelope out. I've been knowing what it means for 10 months, and I've been keeping it in that cabinet. Caleb took the envelope. He didn't open it yet. Why? He said. Cole looked at him. Because Mallory owns the building this office is in, he said. Because my lease is up for renewal in October. Because I have a wife and 2 children in Amarillo that I send money to every month. He stopped. The honesty of it hung in the air between them, ugly and plain. Because I was afraid. And because I told myself James would have wanted me to be careful. But mostly because I was afraid. Caleb looked at him for a moment. Then he opened the envelope. Inside were 3 folded pages. Survey records, hand annotated in a careful, precise hand. The hand of a man who checked everything twice. 2 of the pages showed property lines with measurements noted in the margins. The third was a different kind of document. A list of names and dates written in the same careful hand. Dates of transactions. Amounts. One of the names on the list was the county land registrar. Caleb read it twice. Slowly. Who else has seen this? He asked. No one. Just me and now you. Tom Reddick, Caleb said, looking at the list. The name was there one transaction 3 months before James Whitmore died. He worked on the Mallory crew. He was there the day of the accident. He was, Cole said. And he left Red Hollow 2 weeks after James died. Came back 6 months ago. He drinks at the saloon most evenings. Cole paused. He doesn't look like a man who sleeps well. Caleb folded the pages back into the envelope. I'm going to hold on to these, he said. Cole nodded like a man who had just set down something very heavy. I'll come by to see Sarah this afternoon. I'll bring more of the tincture. Cole. Caleb looked at him. You said it in the door last night, that it was time to say things out loud. He paused. Are you prepared to say them out loud in front of people who matter, not just to me? Cole's jaw worked. He looked at the window. Outside on the street, someone was passing boots on the boardwalk, unhurried, ordinary. The sounds of a town that didn't know it was sitting on a lie. I don't know yet, Cole said quietly. That's honest, Caleb said. I'll take honest. He didn't go straight back to the repair shop. He went to the saloon. It was early enough that this place was nearly empty. Just the barman stacking glasses, and one man at the far end of the bar, who sat with both hands around a glass he hadn't touched. Tom Reddick was about 40, lean in the way men got lean when they weren't eating well, with the look of someone who had been watching the door every time it opened for a long time. He looked up when Caleb sat down 2 stools away. Don't know you, Reddick said. No, Caleb agreed. But you knew James Whitmore. Reddick went very still. His hands, still wrapped around the glass, didn't move. A pulse of something went through his face. Not guilt exactly, more like the look of a man who has been waiting for a particular knock on a particular door for so long that when it finally comes, he doesn't know if he feels dread or relief. Where'd you get that name? Reddick said. Low, careful. Same place I got yours, Caleb said. From a piece of paper a dead man left with a doctor. The glass in Reddick's hands cracked slightly. He looked down at it, then set it on the bar. I didn't push him, Reddick said. The barman was very busy at the far end of the counter. Tell me what happened, Caleb said. Reddick's jaw moved. He pulled the glass toward him and then pushed it away. He was building himself up to something the same way Cole had the same architecture of a man approaching a thing he'd been avoiding. We were on the scaffolding, Reddick said. 3rd level. James and me and 2 of Mallory's men, Doyle and Curtis. James had found the survey papers by then. Mallory knew he'd found them. I didn't know that at the time, But I knew something was wrong because Doyle and Curtis were acting strange, watching James more than they were working. Reddick stopped, swallowed. James slipped, he said. That's what I told people. That's what I signed my name to saying. He stopped again. He didn't slip. Doyle went into him from the side. I was 20 feet away. I saw it. I saw the whole thing. His voice had gone very quiet, very flat. And then Doyle looked at me across that scaffolding, and I knew right then that if I said anything, they'd find a way for me to have an accident too. Caleb was quiet for a moment. So you left. 2 weeks later. I couldn't look at this town anymore. I couldn't look at myself. He turned the glass over on the bar, mouth down. I came back because I ran out of money, and I didn't have anywhere else. And because I thought maybe... He stopped. Maybe what? Maybe if I was back here, if I was close enough, I could do something. His voice was raw. But Mallory's got the sheriff. He's got the land registrar. He's got half the town by the throat one way or another, and I'm just some drunk at a bar with a story nobody wants to hear. I want to hear it, Caleb said. Reddick looked at him. Who are you, mister? Nobody important. But I've got James Whitmore's papers, and I've got a doctor who's running out of excuses to stay quiet. And now I've got you. He paused. That's 3. 3's a different number than 1. Reddick stared at him. Mallory will find out, he said. He always finds out. He's got eyes in this town everywhere. I know, Caleb said. He'll come after the family. That's what he does. He goes after the thing that hurts you worst. I know that too. Then what are you going to do about it? Reddick's voice cracked slightly on the last word. Not anger, desperation. The desperation of a man who has been carrying a thing alone for 10 months and doesn't know how much longer he can hold it. Caleb put both hands flat on the bar and stood up. I'm going to make sure Sarah Whitmore doesn't get moved out of that building before she's well enough to stand up in a courtroom, he said. And then I'm going to find a way to get what we know in front of someone Mallory can't buy. He looked at Reddick. But I need you to be willing to say what you saw, out loud, in front of people, when the time comes. Reddick looked at the upturned glass for a long time. His breathing was uneven. His hands were not quite steady. I've got a room at the boarding house, he said finally. If something happens to me before this goes anywhere, if I disappear or I have an accident, there's a letter in the floorboard under the cot, 3rd board from the wall. He looked up. You remember that? I'll remember it, Caleb said. Don't disappear. He came back to the repair shop at midday and found a situation that had changed while he was gone. A man was standing outside the door, not Mallory. Caleb had not yet seen Mallory, but he had the sense that Mallory would not come himself to a thing like this. This was one of Mallory's men. The type came in a recognizable shape, a certain kind of ease in the body that came from knowing you were backed by money and power. He was leaning against the doorframe with his arms crossed, and Emily was standing in front of him with both arms at her sides, chin up, and May was behind her in the chair. Tell your mother she needs to think carefully, the man was saying as Caleb came within earshot. His voice was smooth, almost pleasant, the kind of voice that had learned to sound reasonable while delivering unreasonable things. Mr. Mallory is being very patient. He doesn't want to involve the sheriff. But the debt is real, and the land. There is no debt, Emily said. Now, miss, you're a child, and this is a grown-up matter. My name is Emily Whitmore, and I am 12 years old, and I know the difference between a real signature and a forged one. Emily said in a voice that did not shake. And if Mr. Mallory comes here himself and looks me in the eye and tells me my father signed those papers, I'll call him a liar to his face. Caleb stepped up beside her. The man looked at him. A recalibration happened behind his eyes, measuring, adjusting. This a friend of yours? The man said to Emily, though his eyes stayed on Caleb. Yes, Emily said without hesitating. Caleb looked at the man steadily. You've delivered your message, he said. You can go. The man smiled. It didn't reach anywhere near his eyes. Mr. Mallory's a reasonable man. He'd like to resolve this without... You've delivered your message, Caleb said again. Same tone, same steadiness. Go. Something read in the man's face. A calculation, a decision that this particular moment wasn't the one, and he pushed off the doorframe with an air of practiced ease and walked away down the road without looking back. Emily let out a breath. Just one controlled. "He's been here before," she said. "Not him. Other ones. They come with the same speech every time." "How often?" "Once a week, sometimes twice." She watched the man until he turned the corner. "They started coming more when Mama got sick." Caleb looked at the corner for a moment after the man had gone. "Does your mother know how bad the pressure Mallory's putting on?" Emily's silence was its own answer. "She's sick," Emily said finally. "She doesn't need to know everything." "No," Caleb agreed. "But she needs to know enough, because what we're about to do is going to move fast, and she needs to be the one to decide whether she wants it to happen." Emily turned to look at him. "What are we about to do?" He met her eyes. "Fight back," he said. For the first time since he'd met her, Emily Whitmore smiled. It was small, and it was brief, and it was the most unguarded thing he'd seen from her. Then it was gone, and the careful face was back, and she turned and pushed open the door to let him inside. Sarah was awake and sitting up when he came in, barely with the cot's frame to lean against, but sitting up. It had clearly cost her something. Her face was pale, and the effort was visible in the lines around her eyes, but her gaze was sharp, and she'd combed her hair. And these two things together told Caleb something about the kind of woman she was. "Dr. Cole came," she said. "He told me you'd been to see him." "Yes, ma'am. He told me about the envelope." Her voice was careful even. "About what James left with him." Caleb looked at her. "He told you everything." "He told me enough." She held his gaze. "James knew, didn't he? He knew before he died that it was dangerous. He knew, and he didn't tell me because he was trying to protect me." Caleb didn't answer. He didn't need to. Sarah looked at the far wall for a moment. Her hands were in her lap, folded the same way May folded hers. "He was always doing that," she said. "Protecting me from things. Carrying them alone." Her voice was steady, but it had the quality of something that was steady because she had decided to make it steady, not because it came naturally. "He was wrong to do that. I told him 100 times, whatever it is, tell me. We carry it together, or we don't carry it at all." She stopped. "He never quite believed me. I was trying to do right by you," Caleb said. "I know." She looked back at him. "He was a good man, Mr. Mercer. He was one of the genuinely good ones, and someone killed him for it." She said it directly, no softening, no hedge. "I've known that since October. Since before the doctor stopped coming, before Mallory's men started showing up. I've known it, and I've had no way to do anything about it, because I've been lying in this cot watching my children starve by degrees." The room was very quiet. Noah had come in sometime in the last few minutes, and was standing near the back wall, and May was awake in her chair, and Emily stood near the door, and all of them were very still in the way of people listening to something important. "There's a man named Tom Reddick," Caleb said. "He was on the scaffolding." Sarah's eyes closed briefly. When they opened, they were the same, not broken, just weighted. "I always thought someone had to have seen it. He'll talk. When the time comes, he'll talk. And until then," Caleb said, "I'm not leaving, and no one is moving you out of this building." He paused. "That's a promise, Mrs. Whitmore. I don't make them easy, and I don't break them." She looked at him for a long moment. The evaluation in her eyes was different from Emily's, less about threat assessment, more about something deeper. The look of a woman who had been betrayed by the world's indifference long enough to have learned how to read sincerity. "Why?" she asked. Not challenging, genuinely asking. "Your daughter split a biscuit on the road," Caleb said simply. "And nobody in this town moved to help her. I've been a lot of things in my life, Mrs. Whitmore, but I won't be another person who looked away." Sarah held his gaze. Then she nodded once, slow, the nod of a woman committing to a direction. "All right, Mr. Mercer," she said. "Let's fight." From the doorway, Emily made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Caleb glanced back and found her staring at the floor with her jaw tight and her eyes very bright. She didn't wipe them. She just stood there and let the moment pass through her, and then she looked up, and the careful face was back. But it was different now. There was something underneath it that hadn't been there before. Something that looked faintly and carefully like hope. By evening, the town knew a stranger was staying at the Whitmore place. Caleb hadn't tried to hide it, and he hadn't announced it, and the information had spread the way. Information spread in a town like Red Hollow through the feed store, through the barber, through the particular social machinery of a small community that ran on observation and gossip, and the constant low-grade vigilance of people living too close together. He found out it had reached Mallory's ears before sundown, because a second man came, different from the morning's visitor. Older, quieter, with a much more deliberate quality to his ease. He didn't go to the door. He stopped on the road outside and looked at the building for a moment, then looked at Caleb, who was sitting on an upturned crate in front of the entrance, mending a section of harness leather he'd borrowed from the livery. "Mr. Mallory asks if you'd like to join him for supper," the man said. "Tell Mr. Mallory thank you for the invitation," Caleb said. "I've already eaten." "He'd like to talk." "I imagine he would." Caleb set down the leather and looked at the man. "Tell him I'm not hard to find." The man studied him for a moment. "Mr. Mallory's a patient man." "Good for him." Another moment. Then the man turned and walked away. Behind him, through the open door of the repair shop, Caleb heard Noah let out a long, slow breath. "That was Holt," Noah said. "Mallory sends Holt when he's serious." Caleb picked the leather back up. "I know," he said. "You knew, and you said no anyway." "I said no because yes would have told him something he doesn't need to know yet." Caleb pulled the stitch through. "When I'm ready to meet Victor Mallory, I'll go to him on my own terms, not his." He could feel the boy thinking behind him, processing, measuring the same way Emily processed and measured the family quality of it recognizable now. "Mr. Mercer," Noah said. "Caleb." "Caleb." A pause. "Are you scared?" Caleb thought about it honestly. He thought about the envelope in his jacket pocket and the name of a county land registrar on a list and a dead man who had checked everything twice and still hadn't been careful enough. He thought about Reddick at the bar with his upturned glass and Cole with his hand on the doorframe and the long-practiced indifference of an entire town. "Some," he said, "but not enough to stop." Noah was quiet for a moment. Then quietly, "Me neither." Caleb didn't look back. He just nodded and kept pulling the stitch through, and the evening came down over Red Hollow, hot and dry and certain, and somewhere on the north side of town, in a house with real windows and real floors. Victor Mallory sat with his supper and got the message that the stranger had declined, and out front of an old repair shop. A woman breathed through the night with her children around her, and a man who had almost ridden through without stopping sat and mended old leather in the last of the light. The town watched. It always watched. The question was whether this time watching would be enough. Victor Mallory came himself the next morning. Caleb had expected it. When a man like Mallory sent his second best and got turned down, the next move was always to come personally, not because he was angry, but because he needed to take the measure of the obstacle. Men like Mallory didn't get to where they were by losing their tempers over small setbacks. They got there by reading people fast and accurately and knowing which kind of pressure to apply. Caleb was out front again when the buggy pulled up. Mallory stepped down without hurrying. He was 60 or close to it, well built through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of face that had been handsome once and had settled into something more commanding with age. He wore a good suit and a hat that cost more than most men in Red Hollow made in a month, and he walked toward Caleb with his hands loose at his sides and a measured, pleasant expression that had probably never been entirely sincere in his life. "Mr. Mercer," he said, extending a hand. "Victor Mallory. I apologize for not coming sooner." Caleb shook it. Firm brief. "Mr. Mallory." "I wanted to introduce myself properly." Mallory looked at the building, then back at Caleb. The look was brief, but thorough. "I understand you've taken an interest in the Whitmore family." "I have." "Generous of you. They've had a hard year." Mallory's voice carried genuine-sounding sympathy, the kind that had been refined through long practice. "James Whitmore was a decent man. His death was a tragedy." "It was," Caleb said, "which is why I've tried to be patient with the family in the matter of the debt." Mallory tilted his head slightly. I don't enjoy pressing a grieving widow. I want you to know that. But the debt is real, and the land deed does transfer under the terms of the original agreement, and I do have a responsibility to my own business affairs. Caleb looked at him. He let the silence run for just a beat longer than comfortable. What did James Whitmore borrow the money for? He asked. Something moved in Mallory's eyes. Almost nothing. A man less practiced at watching people would have missed it. Equipment, Mallory said. For the repair shop, he wanted to expand. What kind of equipment? A pause, very controlled. I don't recall the specifics. My bookkeeper handles the details. Your bookkeeper would have records then. Of course. Good, Caleb said pleasantly. I'd like to see them. The pleasant expression on Mallory's face didn't change. But something behind it went very still, the way water goes still right before it drops. You're not a lawyer, Mr. Mercer. No, sir, I'm not. Then on what basis? On the basis that I'm a man asking a question, Caleb said. You've got nothing to hide. The records will clear the whole thing up, and Sarah Whitmore can settle the matter through proper channels. He paused. Unless there's a reason the records are hard to produce. Mallory looked at him. The pleasantness was still in place, the same way paint stayed on old wood on the surface holding. I can see you're a man who asks direct questions, he said. I respect that. I'll have my bookkeeper pull the relevant documents. This doesn't need to be adversarial. I agree completely, Caleb said. Mallory nodded once the nod of a man filing something away for later. I hope you enjoy your stay in Red Hollow, he said with exactly the right amount of warmth. If you need anything while you're here, please let me know. He turned, climbed back into the buggy, and drove away without another look. Caleb watched him go. Noah was at his shoulder. He's going to move faster now, Noah said quietly. Yes, Caleb said. He is. I was right about that. By afternoon, word had come through Hannah Doyle, the woman who ran the boarding house on the east side of town, and seemed to know the movements of Red Hollow the way a doctor knows a body from long habit and careful attention. She appeared at the repair shop door just before 2 o'clock. A small, sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who had clearly made a decision about something and was executing it before she could change her mind. I knew James Whitmore, she said to Caleb without preamble when Emily let her in. I knew him well. He used to come fix things for me at the boarding house. Wouldn't take full payment, always said half was enough. She looked at Caleb steadily. I heard you talk to Mallory this morning. Yes, ma'am. I heard you asked about the records. She paused. This afternoon, Mallory sent 2 men to see Bill Pierce at the general store. I know because Pierce's wife was at the dry goods counter, and she told my girl who told me. She folded her hands. Pierce owes Mallory money, a lot of it. Those men weren't there to collect. They were there to remind him of it, Caleb said. Yes. Hannah Doyle looked at him directly. Pierce was the one who witnessed the loan document, James's alleged signature. He's the one who would have to say under oath that he saw James sign it. Those men were reminding him what happens if his memory gets complicated. The room was quiet. Emily was standing near the wall. She hadn't moved. Mrs. Doyle, Caleb said. How many people in this town know what Mallory is? The woman exhaled. It was a long-waited exhale, the sound of someone releasing something they'd been holding for a while. Most of them know something, she said. But knowing something and being willing to say it are different countries, Mr. Mercer. Mallory has got his fingers into almost every business in this town one way or another. A loan here, a lease there. He's patient. He's been patient for 20 years, and the town has let him be patient because it was easier. Until now, Emily said from the wall. Both Caleb and Hannah looked at her. Her arms were crossed, her chin was up, and she had the expression of someone stating a fact that she has decided will be true through sheer force of commitment. Hannah Doyle looked at the girl for a long moment. Something in the older woman's face shifted something private and moved. Until now, she agreed quietly. What will you do? Caleb asked her. I'll talk, Hannah Doyle said. When it comes to it, I've got a room full of boarders who've seen things over the years. Men passing through men working for Mallory, who drank too much and talked too much. I've kept those stories in my head because I didn't know who to tell them to. She looked at Caleb squarely. I know who to tell them to now. She left the way she'd come, direct, unhurried, a woman on the right side of a decision. Emily watched the door for a moment after she'd gone. She's the first person from this town, she said. She won't be the last, Caleb said. Emily turned to look at him. Her eyes were very bright and very controlled, and she believed him and didn't entirely want to, because believing things had a cost she'd learned firsthand. You don't know that, she said. No, he admitted. But I know people. And I know the way a town's conscience works. One person says it out loud, then two, then it gets easier. He met her gaze. Your father's been the truth in this town for 10 months. It's been sitting there waiting for someone to say it. That's what Mallory's most afraid of. Not me. Not the papers. The moment the truth stops being unsayable. Emily was quiet for a long moment. Then she turned and went back to her mother. Reddick was gone from the saloon that night. Caleb found the barman wiping down the counter with the slightly over-careful attention of a man pretending not to know something. Reddick, Caleb said. Haven't seen him today, the barman said, not looking up. His room at the boarding house is empty, Caleb said. Hannah Doyle said he didn't come back last night. His things are still there. The barman stopped wiping. He set the cloth down. He looked at the counter. I don't know anything about that, he said. I'm not saying you do. Caleb kept his voice level. I'm asking if you saw anything. A long pause. The barman picked the cloth back up. 2 of Mallory's men came in yesterday evening, he said very quietly to the counter. They sat with Reddick for about an hour. After they left, Reddick sat alone for a while. Then he left. The cloth moved. He didn't look right when he left. He looked like a man who'd been told something. Caleb stood there for a moment. Did he look scared? He looked decided, the barman said, which is different. He glanced up briefly. I've been watching Tom Reddick drink himself sideways for 6 months. I've never seen him look decided about anything. Last night he looked like a man who'd made up his mind about something. Caleb went to the boarding house. He went to Reddick's room, and he counted 3 boards from the wall, and he lifted the 3rd one. The letter was there. He read it standing in the empty room by the last light of the window. Reddick's handwriting was rough and uneven, but it was clear, a full account of what he'd seen on the scaffolding. Names, dates, Doyle and Curtis. The sideways shove. James Whitmore's hands grabbing at nothing. Reddick had written it without ornament, in the flat, confessional tone of a man writing something he expected might be read at his own inquest. At the bottom he'd written, "If I'm gone, this is why." And Mercer knows the rest. Caleb folded the letter very carefully and put it in his jacket pocket next to the envelope from Cole. I went back to the repair shop in the dark and sat outside on the upturned crate and thought about Tom Reddick's face in the saloon, the way his hands had been tight around the glass, the way he'd said I didn't push him before Caleb had asked any question at all, the weight a man carries when he knows something and can't put it down. He looked decided. Caleb hoped that meant Reddick had gone somewhere to be safe. He held the hope carefully, the way you held something you weren't sure of. Jatan. Sheriff Briggs came the next morning. He was a broad man with a sheriff's star that seemed slightly too large for the shirt it was pinned to, and he had the manner of someone who had been doing a job for a long time in a way that required him to pretend the job was different from what it actually was. He came alone, which meant this was official enough to require a badge and unofficial enough to not require a witness. "You're Mercer," he said. "That's right. I'm going to need to ask you to move along," Briggs said. Not unkindly. The voice of a man delivering a message he'd been told to deliver and had decided to deliver gently. "Red Hollow's a quiet town. We don't need outside parties stirring up settled matters." "What matters have been stirred up?" Caleb asked. Briggs looked at him. "You know what I mean. I'd rather you said it plain. The Whitmore situation is a civil matter between the family and a local businessman. It doesn't require interference." "I'm not interfering with anything," Caleb said. "I'm staying with a family while their mother recovers from an illness. As far as I know, that's not against any law." Briggs's jaw moved. "Mallory's a patient man, but he's not—" "You said Mallory," Caleb said. Briggs stopped. He'd hurt himself. Something moved across his face. Not shame exactly, more like the look of a man who has made a small navigational error and is calculating the cost. I meant the creditor, Briggs said. Of course you did. Caleb looked at him steadily. Sheriff, I have a letter written by a witness to James Whitmore's death. I have survey documents that James Whitmore himself gathered before he died. And I have a doctor who is prepared to speak about what he knows. He paused. The circuit judge comes through here in 3 weeks. I'd like all of this to still be in place when he arrives. The silence that followed was the specific silence of a man recalibrating. Briggs looked at Caleb for a long moment. His star caught the light. You're putting yourself in a bad position, he said finally. I've been in bad positions before. This town watched a family starve for 10 months and called it none of their business, Caleb said. His voice was still level, still quiet. I understand the position that puts people in. I understand the pressure Mallory applies, and I understand why people bend under it. But I'm not going to bend, Sheriff. And I think somewhere underneath whatever he's told you, you know the Whitmore family didn't deserve what happened to them. Briggs stood there. He was a big man, and he looked in that moment like he was carrying something inside the size of a building. I can't help you, he said quietly. I know, Caleb said. But can you stay out of the way? A very long pause, the longest yet. I've got rounds to do, Briggs said finally, and turned and walked back down the road. It wasn't a yes, but it wasn't a no either. The twist came from the last direction Caleb had expected. Emily found it. She'd been going through her father's things, the box under the cot that Sarah had kept but never opened because it hurt too much. The box of papers and receipts and small records that James Whitmore had kept with the careful, systematic attention of a man who checked everything twice. Sarah had finally told her to look through it that morning, with the quiet authority of a woman who had decided that lying still and protecting her children from difficult things was no longer a luxury she could afford. Emily came to Caleb with a piece of paper in her hand, and her face was very controlled and very white. There's a copy, she said. Caleb looked at her. A copy of what? The deed. She held the paper out. Her hand was steady. Papa made a copy of the original deed and hid it in the bottom of the box, under the lining. She swallowed. It's dated 4 years ago. It has the original property lines. It's notarized by a judge in Amarillo. Her voice didn't shake. The deed Mallory's been claiming supersedes it was filed 18 months ago, 14 months after this one. Caleb took the paper. He read it carefully the way he'd read James's survey notes. His pulse was steady, and his thinking was clear, and he knew the way a man knows certain things with his whole body, that he was looking at the document that changed everything. This is the original deed, he said. Yes. This means the document Mallory has is fraudulent on its face. The property never transferred. Yes. Emily's voice was very quiet now. Papa knew. That's why he was gathering the survey papers. He wasn't just trying to prove the boundary fraud, he was building a case that would hold up in court. He had this copy, he had the surveys. He probably would have had Reddick as a witness once he knew who'd been watching. She stopped. He had everything. He was almost there. Her voice fractured slightly on the last word, a hairline crack, and she pulled it back together immediately. He was almost there, and then he wasn't. Caleb held the deed and looked at this 12-year-old girl standing in front of him, with her jaw set and her eyes bright and her hands at her sides, and he thought about James Whitmore checking everything twice and hiding a copy of a deed under the lining of a box, because he was the kind of man who understood that you prepared for the worst while working toward the best. He got it there, Caleb said. He got it there because you found it. Emily looked at the deed in his hands. Something passed through her face. Something enormous and private and briefly fully unguarded. Then she blinked, and it was contained again. What do we do with it? We protect it, Caleb said. We don't tell anyone we have it yet, not until we need it. He looked at her. Do you understand why? Because if Mallory knows we have it, he'll try to get rid of it before the judge comes. Exactly. He held the deed out. You keep it. You've kept it safe this long. Emily took it back. She looked at it for a moment, then folded it with the same precision her father had probably used and tucked it inside her dress against her ribs. "Papa was trying to protect us," she said. Not to Caleb, not entirely. To herself or to some private space where she kept her father. "I wasn't just trying to protect the land. He was trying to make sure we had it after." She looked up. "He knew it was dangerous. He did it anyway." "That's what good men do," Caleb said. She nodded once. Then she went back inside. That evening, Mallory's patience ran out. Caleb knew it had because Holt came back not to deliver an invitation this time, but to stand in the road with two other men and make no pretense about why they were there. They didn't approach. They just stood there, visible in the way that was meant to be seen. A communication. "We are here. We are watching. We are no longer pretending this is a civil matter." Noah came to stand beside Caleb. "There's 3 of them," Noah said. "I see that. What do we do?" Caleb looked at the 3 men in the road. He thought about the deed against Emily's ribs. He thought about Reddick's letter in his jacket pocket. He thought about Cole, who had said "I don't know yet" when asked if he would speak. He thought about Hannah Doyle, who had said "I'll talk" without hesitation. He thought about Sheriff Briggs walking away down the road with his star catching the light, and his back carrying the weight of everything he hadn't said. He thought about the circuit judge, and 3 weeks that had just gotten a great deal shorter. "We don't blink," Caleb said. He stood there. Noah stood beside him. The 3 men in the road stood there. And then from across the street a door opened. Hannah Doyle came out of the boarding house and walked to her front steps and stood there with her arms folded, looking at the 3 men without expression. A moment later, from further down the road, Bill Pierce's wife came out onto the front porch of the general store and stood there as well. Then a man Caleb didn't know came out of the barber shop and stood in his doorway. One by one. 4 people. 5. None of them saying anything. Just standing in the light of the evening looking at Holt and his 2 men. The town watching. But watching differently. Holt stood there for another long minute. Then he said something to the 2 men beside him, too quiet to carry. And he turned and walked away. The 2 men followed. Noah let out a breath. "Did that just—" he started. "Don't count it yet," Caleb said. But he said it quietly, and there was something in his voice that wasn't quite the same steadiness as before. Something that had room in it barely for something that felt like the first real shift in weather after a long dry season. Across the street. Hannah Doyle caught his eye and nodded once. He nodded back. Sarah's voice came from inside, thin and clear. "Emily, come tell me what just happened." And Emily, who had been watching from the window, went to tell her mother the truth, all of it, for the first time in a very long while. 2 hours later, while the household slept, Caleb sat alone in the storeroom with the deed and the envelope and Reddick's letter spread out on the cot in front of him. He'd been turning it over in his mind all evening, the timeline, the pieces, what they had, and what they still needed. They had the original deed. They had the survey records. They had a written testimony from a man who'd watched James Whitmore die. They had a doctor who was moving toward saying his piece. They had one boarding house keeper and a handful of townspeople who had stood in the road tonight and shown Mallory's men a different face. What they didn't have was a guarantee. Mallory was still standing. His money was still real. His reach into the courthouse, the sheriff's office, the land registry still real. 3 weeks until the circuit judge, and 3 weeks was a long time in a town where everything could shift overnight. Caleb looked at the deed. He looked at James Whitmore's careful handwriting on the survey pages, the annotations in the margins, the measurements, the observations of a man building a case piece by careful piece. He thought about how close James had been. How close and how alone. He picked up the deed and held it. He wasn't alone. Outside in the main room, May had woken up, and Emily was talking to her in a low voice. The kind of voice that was meant to help someone go back to sleep. He could hear the murmur of it through the storeroom wall, not words, just tone. The sound of a sister taking care. Caleb lay back on the cot and stared at the ceiling. Tomorrow, Mallory would try something different. Something bigger. Because the men standing in the road had changed the calculation, and Mallory would know it, and men like Mallory didn't absorb changed calculations quietly. Whatever came next was going to come fast. He was ready for it, or close enough to it that the difference didn't matter yet. They came at midnight. Caleb heard them before he saw them. The particular sound of horses moving with deliberate quiet. The kind of quiet that took effort, which meant it was intentional, which meant it was planned. He was off the cot and had his boots on before the first rider reached the road outside. He opened the storeroom door, and Noah was already up standing in the middle of the main room, with his jaw set and his eyes moving to Caleb immediately. "How many?" Noah said. "Can't tell yet. More than 2. Caleb crossed to the front and looked through the gap in the boards over the window. The road was dark, but not empty. He counted shapes, 4, 5, a 6th, near the corner. 6 at least. "Sheriff's with them," Noah said. He'd looked through a different gap lower on the wall. "I can see the star." Emily was up. She was standing near her mother's cot, with one hand on the frame and the other holding something against her chest that Caleb recognized as the deed. She'd slept with it. He'd suspected she would. May was awake in her, very still, watching the door, with the particular stillness of a child who had learned that stillness was sometimes the safest response. Sarah was awake and sitting up. Her breathing was audible, but her eyes were sharp, and she had the expression of a woman who had been half expecting this and had been using the waiting time to decide exactly who she intended to be when it arrived. "Mrs. Whitmore," Caleb said, "you stay on that cot. No matter what happens, you don't get up. Dr. Cole made that clear." "I heard Dr. Cole," Sarah said. "Then you heard the part where he said moving you right now is a serious risk." "I heard that part too." Her voice was steady. "Go to the door, Mr. Mercer." He went to the door. He opened it before they knocked. That mattered. It said he wasn't hiding, wasn't startled, wasn't anything other than a man who had been expecting this and had made his preparations. Holt was in front. Briggs was beside him, slightly behind, in the specific body language of a man who was present but working hard to be as unpresent as possible. Behind them were 5 others. Mallory's men, not the sheriff's, no badge among them. Mallory himself was not there. Of course he wasn't. "Mercer," Holt said. "We have a lawful eviction order, signed by Judge Callow this afternoon. The Whitmore family has 48 hours to vacate the premises." Caleb stood in the doorway and looked at the paper Holt held out. He didn't take it. He read it from where he stood, which was close enough. Judge Callow, County Court. The signature was real. He'd heard Callow's name twice now in connection with the list in James Whitmore's papers. "Judge Callow is on Mallory's payroll," Caleb said. Holt's expression didn't change. "That's a serious accusation. It's in a document James Whitmore put together before he died. His name is on a list of payments, dates, and amounts." Caleb looked at Holt directly. "You know this order is fraudulent. Every man standing behind you knows it." A silence. Briggs shifted his weight. The movement was small and involuntary, and it said everything. "The order is lawful and signed," Holt said. "We're here to serve it." "You're here at midnight," Caleb said. "Lawful evictions happen in daylight. The order doesn't specify. There is a woman inside this building who will die if she is moved." Caleb's voice was still level, still quiet, with the particular quality of quiet that is not the absence of force, but its controlled application. "Dr. Edwin Cole examined her 2 days ago and said it plainly. Moving her is a serious risk to her life. You put her on a wagon tonight in her condition, you may be serving an eviction order, and you may be killing a woman, both at the same time." Holt looked at him. Something moved in the man's face that he didn't entirely suppress, a brief crack in the professional smoothness there and gone. "That's not our responsibility." "No," Caleb said. "It's yours, Sheriff." Briggs went very still. Every man in that road looked at the sheriff. The moment had the quality of a held breath, the whole scene suspended on what Briggs did next. "Sheriff," Caleb said, "you told me 2 days ago you couldn't help. I accepted that. I'm not asking you to help. I'm asking you whether you are prepared to stand in front of a circuit judge in 3 weeks and explain why you served a midnight eviction order on a dying woman at the direction of the man who owns half this town." Briggs didn't move. The circuit judge, Caleb said, is going to hear about James Whitmore. He's going to see the original deed. He's going to read a written testimony from a witness who was on that scaffolding. He's going to hear from Dr. Cole. He paused. Every man who took part in what happens tonight is going to have to account for it. Every single one. The silence was very long. Holt turned to look at Briggs. It was the look of a man who had expected a resource to be available and was discovering it might not be. Briggs cleared his throat. "We'll come back in the morning," he said. His voice was rough, like the words had to come from somewhere deep and disagreeable. "With daylight. When there's a doctor present to assess the patient's condition." Holt's jaw went tight. That's what I'm deciding," Briggs said. He didn't look at Holt. He looked at the ground, then at the road, then at nothing in particular, with the expression of a man who has just done the first right thing he's done in a very long time and is already calculating what it will cost him. "We'll come back in the morning." He turned his horse. After a moment, his deputies followed. Holt stood there for 3 more seconds, long enough to let Caleb feel the weight of what he was carrying, and then turned as well. They rode out. Noah was at Caleb's back. "They'll come back." "Yes," Caleb said, "but not tonight." He turned and went inside. Emily had both arms around her mother. May's hands were folded in her lap, and she was staring at the door, and her face was very young and very old at the same time. Sarah had one arm around Emily and was looking at Caleb over her daughter's head with an expression he didn't have a word for. Not gratitude, exactly, something more complex and more durable than gratitude. "You should sleep," Caleb told them. "You first," Emily said into her mother's shoulder. He almost smiled. He went back to the storeroom instead. He didn't sleep. He wrote. He'd found paper and a pencil in the storeroom 2 days ago and hadn't touched them. Now he sat on the cot and wrote everything down. The timeline, the names, the evidence, what Cole had said, what Reddick had written, the dates on the deed versus the dates on Mallory's document, Judge Callow's name on the list. He wrote it the way James Whitmore had written things, careful, systematic, checking each detail twice. He wrote 2 copies. One he put with the deed and the other documents. The other he folded and addressed to the federal marshal's office in Amarillo. Then he sat and thought about how to get it there before morning. I went to Hannah Doyle before dawn. She answered the door in a robe with her hair pinned back, and she didn't look particularly surprised to see him, which told him she'd heard the horses last night. "They came," she said. "Briggs held them off until morning. I need to get something to the federal marshal's office in Amarillo before Mallory finds out." Briggs blinked. He held out the folded letter. "Is there anyone you trust to ride hard?" Hannah looked at the letter, then at his face. She turned and called back into the house. "Henry." A boy of about 16 appeared at the top of the stairs, already dressed. He'd clearly been awake. "How fast can you get to Amarillo?" Caleb asked him. "Change horse at Ridgeway, 7 hours, the boy said without hesitation. Like he'd already calculated it. Like he'd been waiting to be asked something useful. "Ride hard," Caleb said. "Don't stop in town longer than it takes to change horses. Don't tell anyone where you're going or what you're carrying." He held out the letter and enough money for the journey and the return. "You understand?" "Yes, sir." Henry took both and was down the stairs and out the back door inside a minute. Hannah watched him go. "He's a good boy," she said. "I need one more thing," Caleb said. "Dr. Cole, I need him at the repair shop by 8 o'clock, before Holt comes back." "I'll send my girl," Hannah said. She was already moving. "What else?" "That's enough for now," Caleb said. "Thank you, Mrs. Doyle." She waved the thanks away like it was a fly. "James Whitmore fixed my porch steps for free and then argued with me for 20 minutes when I tried to pay him." She said it to the wall, not to Caleb, the way people talked about people they missed. "Go on back. I'll handle Cole." Cole was there at 7:40. He came with his bag and with the look of a man who hadn't slept much either. Eyes clear, jaw tight. The particular alertness of someone who had made a decision overnight and was now living inside it. "I heard what happened," he said to Caleb in the doorway. "Briggs held them. Briggs won't hold twice." Cole set his bag down and moved to Sarah's cot without being asked. He checked her pulse breathing temperature with the quick, certain movements of a doctor who needed the information fast and clean. He stood up and looked at Caleb. "She's no worse," he said. "She's actually slightly better. If this continues another week, she may be able to tolerate—" He stopped. "But she cannot be moved today. I'll put that in writing. Signed, dated with my medical credentials attached." He paused. "And I'm prepared to say the rest, in front of whoever needs to hear it. I want that on the record. I've decided." "What changed?" Caleb asked. Cole glanced at Emily, who was sitting at the table watching him. He looked back at Caleb. "Holt's men came to my office at 10 o'clock last night," he said, "before they went to the road. They weren't threatening exactly. They were reminding me that my lease and my license renewal both go through channels that Mallory has influence over." He straightened. "And I sat there after they left, and I thought about James Whitmore, and I thought about the fact that I've been letting a family suffer, rather than say what I know, and I decided I would rather lose the lease and the license than be the man who let that go on one more day." The room was quiet. Sarah spoke from the cot. "Dr. Cole." Her voice was thin but steady. "Thank you." Cole nodded once tightly and didn't say anything. He sat down and began writing his medical statement. Holt came at 9. He came with Briggs and 4 men, and this time there was a second paper, not just the eviction order, but a supplementary document. And when Caleb read it in the doorway, he understood what Mallory had done overnight. The supplementary document alleged that Caleb Mercer was illegally occupying the property and creating a public disturbance. It was signed by 2 witnesses. Caleb looked at the names and recognized neither of them, which meant they were paid, which meant Mallory had moved faster than he'd expected, and used a night of Briggs's hesitation to build a legal wall. "This one's for you," Holt said. "Not the family, you specifically." "I see that," Caleb said. "If you vacate voluntarily, the family gets the full 48 hours guaranteed under the first order. And if I don't, then you're removed by law and the family's order accelerates to 12 hours. It was clean. It was exactly the kind of pressure Mallory applied, not crude, not violent on the surface, just a set of legal mechanisms tightening like a fist. Give up the man protecting them and buy the family 2 days. Make him stay and sacrifice the time. Caleb looked at Holt for a long moment. Then he looked at Briggs. Briggs was looking at the road. He had the expression of a man who was being very specifically somewhere else in his head. "Give me 5 minutes, Caleb said. Holt looked surprised by the compliance. 5 minutes, he said. Caleb went inside and closed the door. Emily was standing in the middle of the room. She'd heard it all. Her face was white and set, and both her arms were crossed over her chest over the deed, and she looked like she'd been carved from the same dry red rock as the Texas ground outside. "Don't," she said. "Emily, don't you dare leave," she said. Her voice didn't shake, which somehow made it worse. "Don't you dare stand out there and decide to sacrifice yourself because you think it helps us. It doesn't help us. You're the only one who knows all of it, the papers and Reddick and Cole and all of it. If you leave, we don't have anyone who can put it together." "I'm not leaving," Caleb said. She stopped. The set of her jaw stayed hard, but her eyes shifted. "What?" "I said I'm not leaving." He looked at her. "I'm going to go back out there and tell Holt no, and then we're going to see what Mallory does next. But I need you to do something." "What?" "I need you to take May and go to Hannah Doyle's, right now before anything else happens. You take the deed and the documents with you, and you don't come back until I send Noah for you." "I'm not leaving, Mama. Your mother can't be moved, which means they're not taking her anywhere today regardless. Cole's written statement makes that clear. But if those papers are in this building when Mallory's men come inside, they'll disappear." He looked at her steadily. "You know that." Emily looked at him. She looked at her mother. Sarah gave a small firm nod from the cot, not asking her, telling her. The nod of a mother who had made a calculation. Emily went to May. She took the handles of the chair. She looked back at Caleb once, and the look held everything. She wasn't saying, the fear, the fury, the trust that she had given him, and was now testing itself against the hardest moment yet. "You better still be here when I get back," she said. I'll be here, he said. She pushed May through the back and was gone. I went back to the door. No, he said to Holt. Holt's face went flat. Then the 12-hour order takes effect when a doctor certifies the patient can be safely moved, Caleb said. Dr. Cole is inside right now, and his written statement says she cannot. You want to test that in front of the circuit judge, that's your business. Holt looked at him. The smooth professional patience was wearing thin now, not gone, but visibly thinner, like cloth that had been pulled too many times. You're making this worse for yourself, Holt said. I expect I am, Caleb agreed. Mallory has resources you don't. He does. He has half this town in one pocket and the courthouse in the other, and he has been operating in this county for 20 years without anyone successfully standing against him. I know that too, Caleb said. Then what exactly do you think you're doing? Caleb looked at him. I'm buying time, he said simply. That's all. Just time. Holt stared at him for a moment. Then he turned and said something to his men in a low voice, and they moved not toward the building, but fanning out slightly, positioning a statement. We are not leaving. We will be here. Tonight, Holt said. We'll be back tonight. I'll be here, Caleb said. Holt rode off with 2 men. 2 stayed. They posted themselves across the road where they were clearly visible and settled in with the patience of men being paid to wait. Caleb went back inside. Cole was finishing his statement. Noah was standing near his mother's cot, one hand on the back of a chair, and he looked at Caleb with a question on his face that wasn't quite a question. They're watching the building, Caleb said. For how long? Noah asked. Until tonight, maybe before. And then, Caleb sat down. He looked at the ceiling for a moment, the cracked plaster, the dry wood. He thought about Henry riding hard toward Amarillo. He thought about the circuit judge 3 weeks out. He thought about the stack of evidence at Hannah Doyle's in Emily's arms. He thought about Tom Reddick wherever he was, and the letter that said Mercer knows the rest. He thought about James Whitmore, who had gathered all the pieces and almost made it. Almost. Then we find out what this town is made of, he said. The real thing. Underneath everything, Mallory's built on top of it. He looked at Noah. People stood in that road 2 nights ago. They didn't have to. They did it anyway. Noah was quiet for a moment. Then, will it be enough? Caleb looked at the door. Outside, 2 men sat in the road and watched, paid by a man who had owned this town for 20 years through debt and fear and the patient application of power to every joint and seam of the community until it moved the way he wanted it to move. I don't know yet, he said. But I know this, your father almost got there alone. He wasn't alone anymore when he died. He left the pieces behind. He met Noah's eyes. We're going to finish what he started. Noah looked at his mother. Sarah was watching her son with an expression that had grief in it and pride in it in equal measure, and her hand found his across the distance of the cot, and he took it. The 2 men across the road settled in. The heat came down like a hammer, and somewhere in the walls of Red Hollow, like water, finding a crack. Something that had been still for 10 months was beginning very slowly to move. Henry came back from Amarillo in 6 hours and 40 minutes. Caleb heard the horse before he saw it, hard riding, the sound of an animal that had been pushed and was still being pushed. And then the boy was at the door, dusty from the road and breathing hard and holding an envelope that had a federal seal on it. They were already coming, Henry said. Marshal Harding. He said he'd had a complaint filed 3 weeks ago about land fraud in Collin and Randall counties, and Red Hollow was already on his list. He held out the envelope. He said to give you this and tell you he'd be here by sundown. Caleb took the envelope. He read it standing in the doorway. Behind him, Noah made a sound, not quite a word. What does it say? Noah asked. It says James Whitmore wasn't the only one, Caleb said. There are 2 other families in neighboring counties. Same pattern. Forged debt documents. Surveying fraud. 1 man dead in an accident. He folded the letter. Mallory's been running this longer and wider than any of us knew. Noah stood very still. So Papa he didn't just find something small. No, Caleb said. He found the whole thing. That's why they couldn't let him talk. Noah turned away. He went to the back wall and stood there for a moment with his back to the room, his shoulders working with something he was keeping inside, and Caleb gave him the time to keep it. Sarah spoke from the cot. Her voice was quiet and even. "How long until the marshal gets here?" "Sundown," Caleb said. 3-4 hours. "Then we need to hold until sundown," she said. It was not a question. "Yes, ma'am." "All right." She settled back against the frame. "Then that's what we do." He sent Noah for Emily. She came back with May, and with the documents pressed against her chest, and the first thing she did when she came through the door was look at Caleb with that measuring look, confirming he was still there and still standing, and then she went straight to her mother. Caleb watched the two of them. Emily sitting on the edge of the cot, Sarah's hand finding her daughter's face, and he turned away to give them the moment. He had 2 hours before everything moved, and he used them. He went to Cole first. "The marshal is coming tonight. I need you ready to give your statement in person." Cole straightened. The last of whatever hesitation had been living in him went out of his face like a candle blown clean. "I'll be ready," he said. "Bring everything. Your records from when you treated Sarah, the dates Mallory's men came to see you, everything." "I'll have it all." Cole paused. "Mercer, I want to say—" "Not yet," Caleb said. "Say it when it's over." Cole nodded and turned back to his desk. He went to Hannah Doyle next, and she was already organizing. She had 3 boarders who had agreed to speak, men who had worked for Mallory at various points and seen various things, and she had written their accounts in her own hand and had them read and sign their names at the bottom. "You've done this before," Caleb said, looking at the pages. "I've been waiting to do this for 6 years, Hannah said. She handed him the stack. "Don't lose those." He went to Pierce at the general store last, and this was the one he was least sure of. Pierce was alone in the store when Caleb came in. He looked up, and his face went through 3 different things, in quick succession: recognition, fear, and then something else. Something that looked like it had been building pressure for a long time. "The marshal's coming tonight," Caleb said. "He's going to want to talk to the witness on Mallory's loan document." Pierce's hands went flat on the counter. "I know what you signed," Caleb said. "I know why you signed it. I'm not here to threaten you. I'm here because a dead man's family has been living in a broken-down building for 10 months, and you are the one person in this town who can confirm in your own words that the signature on that document was not James Whitmore's." "Mallory will destroy me," Pierce said. "Mallory is going to have a federal marshal going through his records by tomorrow morning," Caleb said. "Whatever hold he has on you right now is worth considerably less than it was yesterday." Pierce stared at the counter. His jaw worked. "I have a family," he said. "So did James Whitmore," Caleb said. "Not hard, just plain." The silence lasted a long time. Pierce's hands were pressed so flat against the counter that his knuckles had gone white. "I knew the signature was wrong," Pierce said, very quietly, like a confession that had been waiting behind a locked door for 10 months. "I knew it the day I signed as witness. Mallory told me it was a formality, that James had already agreed verbally and the written signature would come later. He said—" Pierce stopped. "He said a lot of things, and I needed the lease renewed." "Will you say that tonight?" Caleb asked. "To the marshal, out loud." Pierce looked up. His eyes were the eyes of a man who was frightened and ashamed and had been carrying both for long enough that they'd become indistinguishable from each other. "Yes," he said. "God help me, yes." Holt came back at 5 o'clock. He came with 6 men this time, and without Briggs, which told Caleb that Briggs had either been replaced or had simply stopped answering Mallory's requests, and either way, it changed the texture of the situation. Caleb was outside. He'd been outside for an hour because he'd wanted to be seen. Wanted Mallory's people to see that he was still there, still standing, not hidden, not afraid. "The 48 hours are up," Holt said. "Dr. Cole's medical statement has been reviewed by Judge Callow and rejected. Judge Callow," Caleb said, "is going to have a conversation with a federal marshal in approximately 1 hour. I'd be very surprised if he's reviewing any documents after that." Holt went still. Something moved in his face. What Marshall? Marshall Harding, out of Amarillo. Caleb kept his voice even conversational, the tone of a man discussing weather. He's been investigating land fraud in 3 counties. Red Hollow is on his list. He'll be here at sundown. Holt looked at him. The smooth professional surface was cracking now, not collapsing, but cracking. The waystone cracked when the temperature changed too fast. You're bluffing. I'm not much of a bluffer, Caleb said. You've been watching me for 4 days. Have I bluffed about anything yet? Holt turned and said something to the man nearest him, too quiet to hear. The man rode off fast toward Mallory's property, Caleb assumed. Getting word back. Caleb let that happen. He wanted Mallory to know. We're staying, Holt said, until the order is executed, or until you can prove what you just said. That's fine, Caleb said. I want you here when Harding arrives. Tom Reddick walked out of the livery stable at 5:30. Caleb had not known he was there. Nobody had known he was there, or if anyone had known, they hadn't said. He walked out with his hat in his hands and his shoulders straight in the particular posture of a man who had been deciding something for a long time and had finally stopped deciding. He crossed the road to where Caleb stood in front of the repair shop, with Holt and his men still positioned 30 feet away, watching. I didn't leave town, Reddick said. I see that, Caleb said. I went to the livery because old Pete doesn't talk to Mallory's people. He turned his hat over in his hands. I've been there since yesterday. Pete brought me food. He stopped. I heard what you told those men about the marshal. Is it true? Caleb asked. I'll say what I saw, Reddick said. To whoever needs to hear it, I'm done sitting on it. His voice was rough, not emotional, exactly more like sandpaper, the sound of a man who had worn himself down to the grain. I've been sitting on it for 10 months, and I look like this. He gestured at himself. I'd rather be afraid and say it than be safe and keep looking in the mirror. Caleb extended his hand. Reddick shook it. You'll want to be inside when Harding arrives, Caleb said. I'll need you where I can find you. I'll be inside, Reddick said. He turned and went into the repair shop, and Caleb heard Emily's voice from within a sharp, sudden intake of sound that wasn't quite words, and then quiet. Marshal Harding arrived at 6:45, 20 minutes before sundown. He came with 2 deputies and a wagon, and he was a lean man in his 50s, with a face that had been outdoors for most of his life, and eyes that assessed everything in the first 3 seconds and filed it. He looked at Holt and his men in the road. He looked at the building. He looked at Caleb. You Mercer, he said. Yes, sir. You've been busy, Harding said. He swung down from his horse and looked at the envelope in Caleb's hand, the same envelope Caleb had been adding documents to all afternoon, every piece of evidence accumulated into one organized package. Is that for me? Yes, sir. Harding took it, opened it, and stood in the road, reading while his deputies held their horses, and Holt and his men stood very still, with the look of people watching a situation change around them, like weather. Harding read for a long time. He turned pages carefully. He went back to 2 pages and read them again. Then he looked up at Holt. Who are you? He said. Robert Holt. I work for Victor Mallory. Where's Mallory? At his property, sir, North Valley. Get him, Harding said. Tell him Marshal Harding of the federal court wants him in town in 1 hour. Tell him I've got land survey records, a notarized original deed, a written witness testimony, and a list of payments made to a county land registrar and a sitting judge. He paused. Tell him he can come here, or I'll come to him. He'll prefer to come here. Holt looked at Caleb. The look lasted 1 second. Then Holt turned and rode out. They gathered in what passed for Red Hollow's courthouse, a room at the back of the land registry office. The office big enough for 24 people if they stood close. They stood close. Sarah came. Cole and Noah supported her one on each side, and she walked through the door under her own power, with her back straight and her face composed, and the effort it cost her was visible, and she made it anyway, because she had decided she would be standing when this happened. Emily pushed May's chair. She'd taken the deed out from against her ribs, and was holding it in both hands openly, and she walked through that room with it held out in front of her, like something she'd been carrying a long time, and was finally getting to put down in the right place, Hannah Doyle came. Her three boarders came. Bill Pierce came pale and tight-jawed and present. Dr. Cole had his folder of documents. Reddick stood against the wall with his hat in his hands and his eyes on the floor and his body language that of a man doing the hardest thing he'd done in his life. Mallory came in at 7:30. He came without Holt. He came with a lawyer and with the composed, patient expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and knew how to occupy them. He looked at the assembled crowd, and something moved briefly in his face, a rapid internal calculation, and then the composure returned, and he sat down where Harding indicated, and he waited. Harding ran it like a proceeding. He was efficient and relentless, and he had clearly been building this case from outside Red Hollow for weeks before Caleb's letter arrived, and what Caleb had sent had given him the final pieces he'd needed. Cole spoke first. His voice was steady, and he laid out the timeline: James Whitmore's visit in August, the papers left for safekeeping, the months of silence, the pressure applied by Mallory's men, the medical statement about Sarah. He didn't editorialize. He stated facts. Each fact landed in the room like a stone. Pierce spoke next. He was visibly shaking, and his voice broke once, and he kept going. He said he had witnessed a document knowing the signature was not authentic. He said he had been told by Victor Mallory that it was a formality. He said he had renewed his lease the following week. He said it all, and then he sat down and stared at his hands. Reddick spoke last, and the room was very quiet when he did. He described the scaffolding. He described the position of the men. He described what he saw Doyle do, the specific, deliberate movement, the direction of it, James Whitmore's hands. He described the look Doyle gave him across the scaffolding afterward. He described leaving town 2 weeks later. He said it in the flat, exhausted voice of a man who had been saying it to himself in the dark for 10 months and was finally saying it to the right people. When he finished, there was a silence in the room that had a different quality from all the other silences. It was the silence of something that had been unsayable becoming said. Irreversible. Real. Mallory's lawyer leaned toward his client and said something. Mallory looked straight ahead. His composure was still in place, but it had gone rigid, the difference between something flexible and something that was holding, because it had no other option. Emily stepped forward. She walked to Marshall Harding's table and placed the deed on it with both hands. She didn't say anything. She just placed it there and stepped back. Harding looked at it. He looked at the date. He looked at Mallory's document beside it. The comparison took about 4 seconds. "Mr. Mallory," Harding said, "this original deed is dated 4 years ago and notarized by a circuit judge in Amarillo. Your debt and transfer document is dated 18 months ago. Under federal property law, the original deed supersedes any subsequent claim, and the subsequent claim, given the evidence presented here tonight, appears to be fraudulent." He set both documents down. "I'm placing you under arrest for land fraud, falsification of legal documents, and conspiracy in connection with the death of James Whitmore." Mallory stood up. He didn't run. He didn't shout. He did something more revealing. He turned and looked at the room, at all the faces, as if he were taking an inventory of everyone who had turned. His face was perfectly controlled and perfectly empty of everything that might have made him look human in that moment. Then he looked at Emily. She looked back at him. 12 years old, straight spine, both hands at her sides. She didn't look away. He looked away first. Harding's deputies moved. The room emptied slowly. The way rooms emptied after something large had happened. People needing air, needing to be outside, needing the ordinary world to confirm itself around them again. Caleb stood near the wall and watched them go. Hannah Doyle passed him and squeezed his arm once without speaking. Pierce stopped in the doorway and looked back at Caleb and nodded a nod that carried something, an acknowledgement, a weight. Caleb nodded back. Reddick stopped beside him. "It doesn't bring him back," Reddick said. "No," Caleb said. "It doesn't. But it's something." "It's something," Caleb agreed. Reddick put his hat on and walked out into the evening. Sarah was sitting on a bench outside with Cole on one side and Noah on the other when Caleb found her. Emily was beside her with May's chair pulled close, and the 5 of them were together in the quiet way of people who had been through something and didn't need to talk about it immediately. Sarah looked up when he approached. "Sit down, Mr. Mercer," she said. He sat. They were quiet for a while. The town moved around them. People going home, lamps coming on in windows, the ordinary machinery of a summer evening in a small Texas town that had just had something very large move through it. "Emily told me what you said to her," Sarah said eventually. "The morning of the first day, when she tried to refuse the food." "What did she tell you?" I said. "That you said it wasn't charity because you'd bought too much." A pause. "And when she told you that wasn't true, you agreed with her?" "That's accurate," Caleb said. "And then you stayed anyway." Sarah looked at him. "You didn't have to." "No, ma'am, but you did." She was quiet for a moment. "James would have liked you," she said. "He would have liked you very much. He trusted people who told the truth about small things because he thought it meant they'd tell the truth about the big things too." She stopped. "He was right about that." Caleb didn't say anything. He sat with it. Emily spoke from beside her mother. She didn't look at Caleb. She looked straight ahead, and her voice was very careful and very deliberate. The voice of someone saying something they've measured thoroughly before committing to. "My father didn't fall," she said. "And now everybody knows it." She stopped. "And the land is ours. And Mama's going to get better." She stopped again. "Thank you," she said, "for not riding through." He sat with that too. May reached across from her chair and put her small hand on Caleb's arm and left it there, and he let it stay. 3 weeks later, Sarah Whitmore walked out of the repair shop on her own feet. She stood in the road where her daughter had stood with half a biscuit on the hottest Tuesday in July, and she stood there in the morning light and breathed the summer air and looked at the town that had turned imperfectly and late and still with more to answer for, but had turned nonetheless. Marshall Harding had come and gone twice. Judge Callow had been removed from the bench. The county land registrar had resigned and been charged. Mallory was in federal custody in Amarillo awaiting trial, and his lawyer had stopped returning messages, which told Caleb something about how the lawyer read the odds. Reddick had moved into the boarding house and taken a job at the livery. He wasn't done carrying what he carried, but he was carrying it differently now, upright in the light where it could be seen. Hannah Doyle had made it her business to ensure he ate regularly in the brisk, non-sentimental way that was her particular form of kindness. Briggs had resigned the sheriff's position and was replaced 2 weeks later by a man who had ridden in from Lubbock younger with a record of service that Harding had personally vetted. Cole went on treating patients. He treated Sarah more, until the day she didn't need treating anymore, and he refused payment, and she argued with him about it for 20 minutes, and he told her the account was already clear and always had been. Caleb stayed. I didn't announce it. He didn't make a speech about it. He simply did not leave. He fixed the wheel on May's chair properly with the right hardware so it ran straight. He repaired the door frame of the repair shop so it sat true in its casement. He helped Noah haul materials to start work on the front room. One evening, Sarah found him mending harness leather on the front step, the same posture she'd heard described from the night Holt first came, and she sat down beside him, and they were quiet together for a while. "You could have a real shop," she said. "This building. Noah says you know how to work metal." "I know enough," Caleb said. "There's no blacksmith between here and the county line." She said it evenly matter-of-fact, as if she were discussing weather or road conditions. A man who could work metal would have more work than he could handle in a town this size. Caleb kept pulling the stitch through. "I expect that's true," he said. "Is that a yes?" He looked at her. She was looking at him with the same directness she'd looked at everything, clear-eyed, unhurried. A woman who had faced the worst thing and come through it, and was now prepared to face whatever came next with both hands open. "That's a yes," he said. She nodded once the way she nodded when a decision was made and didn't require further discussion. Then she went back inside. Emily appeared in the doorway a moment later. She looked at Caleb. He looked at her. "She asked you to stay," Emily said. "She mentioned the blacksmith situation," Caleb said. Emily's mouth moved. The small, brief, unguarded smile, the one he'd seen once before, the first time he'd said the word fight. It lasted a second. Then her face went composed again, but this time the composure was different. There was something underneath it now that hadn't been there the first day on the road. Something that didn't need to brace for the worst. Something that had the space finally to simply be. "Good," she said. She went back inside. May's voice floated out from within, then Noah's, then Sarah's, the ordinary sound of a family moving through an evening together, in a home that belonged to them on land that was theirs, in a town that had finally been made to say the truth out loud. Caleb pulled the last stitch through and tied it off. A man who had almost ridden through a town had stopped instead and stayed, and the stopping had changed everything. Not just for one family, but for every family in Red Hollow that had learned what it looked like when one person refused to look away. That was the whole of it. That was all of it. And it was enough.